Hi everyone, my name is Riley Haynes and I will be presenting on the effects of gradual release model into the general education classroom on elementary students with social and emotional trauma. My research interest in question. So my research interest for this assignment was the effect that a gradual release model or a slow integration into a general education classroom and the effects that it would have on elementary students who come in with social and emotional trauma. So my research question is, what effect would a gradual release model into the general education classroom have on elementary students with social emotional trauma? I have found that the importance of this research has been getting more and more important the more that I am in education. Especially this last year, I have been dealing with elementary students who I have seen have significant social emotional trauma from home. And just over the years, there have been more cases of elementary students coming to school with a history of social emotional trauma. And there's a lack of knowledge and understanding of how we could better. Like I stated in the slide before, the impact that the social emotional trauma can have on the students does depend on the severity of the trauma, as well as the type of trauma, and the resources to support those students. Research has been done on the effect that social emotional trauma can have on the student's academic success at any grade level, based on the gradual release of the student in the general education classroom. Just a little overview for my literature review. So on the right, you see each bullet. That is each topic of literature that I have reviewed. So the top one is association between child trauma and schools readiness and the role of compassion. So the role of compassion refers to educators, principals, even students, compassion towards that student. So tone of voice, touch, that kind of stuff. Children who have parents with lack of emotional well-being. So parents who have. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about my sampling technique, which in this case was probability sampling and cluster sampling. And in each slide, I'll talk about each individual definition and how I used it in my own research project. The sampling technique that I used was probability sampling. So that is defined as each member of the population has a known chance of being selected and will represent a predetermined population. So what that means in my case is that each student in the school has a known chance of being selected, but will represent a predetermined population, which in my case is those students who have experienced that social and emotional trauma. I use the sampling technique of cluster sampling in order to select groups from a population of groups. So every subject from each group will be selected and observed for the research. The sample is taken from a large population of the school and is then narrowed down by students who have been shown to have that social emotional trauma. And each student in the school who has experienced this kind of trauma will then be a part of the research. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk to you guys about the instrumentation. So the next couple of slides are going to encompass an operational definition, the instrument validity, as well as my instrument reliability. My operational definitions include social emotional, which in this research can be defined as the abuse towards the students at home that have resulted in an effect on the student's social emotional health and well-being in the school setting. Trauma can be defined as the abuse experienced at home, so whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, or social. And gradual release can be defined as integration back into the general education classroom based on the student's success with limited time in the classroom. For my instrument, I used a behavior chart that will be used to assess and collect data on the students after the intervention time away from the general education classroom. So the behavior chart includes a series of expectations that are taught and reinforced with the student. If the student shows the desired behavior, he gets a sticker for the chart. And a sticker is given anytime any of the desired behaviors are given. If the student does not show the desired behaviors, then no stickers are given. This chart is used to measure my instrument reliability. Some threats may include who consistently oversees the behavior chart. If the same consistent group of people do not oversee the chart, it could be different. The ability to assess multiple types of trauma. And this test reliability will be tested with an internal consistency measure, such as a split half. So it would require researchers to analyze the scores for the individual on two halves of the test to determine if they are consistent with each other. For the abbreviated version of my experimental process, groups will be selected, so some who have social emotional trauma and some who do not. Students who are in the intervention will be gradually released into the general education classroom and will receive that intervention with an aide when not inclusive. The intervention will consist of social skills techniques as well as academic content, but it's in a one-on-one area. The research for this uses a factorial design, so the researcher will test the treatment of the interest and control for a potentially extraneous variable. It permits the researcher to determine if the treatment is equally effective over all levels of the variable. Factorial designs can lead to statistical tests that are more sensitive to differences between treatment groups. So it's going to compare the differences between my students who have that social emotional trauma and students who do not. The next couple of slides will encompass the threats to internal validity, threats to external validity, and the threats to reliability. The threats on the right include the consistency of child's routine before school, consistency of teacher's routine before school, consistency of the adult who is working with the student. So every time there is an inconsistent routine before school, it will be noted, so that way we can see if there's any connection. The threats to external validity are mentioned also on the right, so schedule changes within the gen ed class, where the intervention takes place, behaviors or personnel of other students and adults in the general education classroom, because we know that all affects how each student reacts, and the type of task being asked of the student in the general education classroom. So is it writing, is it math, is it science or social studies, or is it playtime? That kind of stuff has an effect on students as well. Just a brief mention of some of the supports to help with the internal and external validity is that if there is any consistency or routines that are thrown off, it's important to document it down just to keep consistency and see if that maybe has an effect on when students' behavior is escalated or de-escalated. That's the best way for my internal and external validity to be helped, is just to document when that inconsistent stuff happens. The next part you're going to see is the proposed statistical methods, which will include data collection, my research hypotheses and null hypotheses, ex post facto, and descriptive statistical calculations, as well as an inferential statistical test. So like I said before, behavior charts are used for my data collection, which you will see a copy of in my appendix, stickers for data points, and it's collected every day. The data is analyzed at the end of every week, and to continue the intervention for at least 3 months. So my research hypotheses are on the right, where you can see that the effect of a gradual release model intervention has a higher success rate of behavior in academic success for students with social emotional trauma. And my null hypotheses below talk about how the academic success of a gradual integration is lower for students, as well as lower for behavior and lower for the difference between the two. Ex post facto. So the research conducted in this research shows that each step is ex post facto. Groups in this study have qualities that already exist and are compared to other students who are have not experienced that social emotional trauma. And the groups in this study are not randomly assigned because they are grouped based on their characteristics, which in this case is their social emotional trauma. The next couple of slides, you will hear me talk about the descriptive statistical calculations, which in my case I used percentile rank and mean. The best way that I could visualize this data would be in a pie chart to show different subject groups and the success of the intervention, and it could be altered into a percentile rank. So each section of the pie chart is then used as a percentage to use as a percentile rank. Another one I would use was mean of the data. So the mean of the raw data collected will be found in order to find that average or center of those numbers collected and see how students compare to that mean. In this next slide, you will hear me talk about inferential statistical test, which in this case I used a t-test. I chose a t-test because it is impossible to give an intervention to every child who has experienced that social emotional trauma. So the research that I have sampled is a representative of the population in hopes that when it's used on that greater population, the success rate percentage would be just as high. So the results can be inferred that if the intervention shows success for the group of students, then it would show similar success in a larger population. So to show an inferential last but not least is my appendix. So I wanted to give you guys a little visual about what I meant by a behavior chart or a sticker chart if you have not seen one before. So in the top part of the ring up there, it says good behavior. That would be my sticker chart. So every day the students are given this new chart to fill with their stickers. So if they show the desired behavior, they get a sticker, which is shown by the little stars on the bottom. Okay, they get a star to put in their chart. Each behavior chart is